Hey, it's Mike from the Run Testers. Now, you might have noticed on the channel recently that we had a video on this watch, the Garmin Venu 2. Now, I imagine there would have been a fair few people who probably own the Garmin Venu, the original, or are looking at a Garmin watch particularly to use for running, and are wondering whether they need to go for the Venu 2, or actually they could save some money and go for the original Venu, or maybe upgrade from the Venu to the Venu 2, wherever you need to. So what I've done the last few weeks, I've kind of lived with both of these watches. I've done plenty of running with them and really get a sense of what they're like to live with, whether there's major improvements over its predecessor, the Venu. So yeah, this is my take on the Garmin Venu 2 and how it compares to the original Garmin Venu. So let's kick things off by talking about the design, and the fact of the matter is that these watches feel very similar to look at and actually to live with, I think anyway. So you're getting a kind of similar size strap, same material, they're removable, the kind of simple pin mechanisms around the back. You're getting polymer cases and a kind of this textured stainless steel bezel around the screen. You're getting 2 physical buttons, so as opposed to the kind of 4 kind of physical buttons that you'll get on traditional kind of Garmin Forerunner and kind of Phoenix watches, and that's because there's more emphasis on using the touchscreen display. Now on those displays you are getting a higher resolution display on the Venu 2 compared to the original Venu. It's still an AMOLED screen, so it's that colour display, and you get that kind of more richer colours, vibrant screen, and a kind of brighter display as well. Now with the Venu 2, there's also a Venu 2S, which is something that we've seen Garmin do with its Forerunner 45 range and its kind of Phoenix range and its Vivo Active range, where it's got the S is for a smaller option. What that means in terms of comparison to the Venu 2 is you're getting obviously a smaller case, a lower resolution screen, and you're getting a little bit less in terms of battery life. Overall, these watches feel very similar, I think. I think obviously if you want a bigger screen and you want that bigger case, go for the Venu 2, but I don't think the difference in terms of living with them and running with them is hugely different. I think the original Venu has a good enough quality AMOLED screen. I think it's a good enough size. They're both very comfortable watches to live with, and I definitely think there's going to be other areas that may sway you or may persuade you to go for one over the other. Now, a note on the screens themselves, and I think it's important to talk about the AMOLED screens and what that means in terms of visibility and being able to look at the screen in all conditions. Now, the reason that Garmin always use transvective displays is that it gives you the best viewing angles in kind of all conditions. Now, with AMOLED screens, it can be a little bit of a struggle sometimes in a kind of brighter light, and that is something that I kind of found. I think the main thing for me is kind of when you're using the raise to wake gesture on these screens, they can take a little bit long to kind of wake up or kind of fully illuminate. Now, you do have always on display modes available on both of these watches. Now that will ultimately impact on battery life, which I'll get into later. So one area which I think is going to have a big say on whether you go for the Venu 2 over the Venu is the interface. Now, with a bigger emphasis on a touchscreen display, that means that ultimately that Garmin had to kind of rethink how you interact with these watches. Now, in the original Venu, it kind of had this kind of very strong widget-based interface. I thought it was kind of a little bit messy. It was quite hard to get to grip straight away where everything kind of lived, particularly if you've used a kind of standard Forerunner or a Phoenix where that interface is quite consistent. Now on the Venu 2, it's kind of incorporated more of what you see in their other watches and put it into the Venu 2. And I think it makes for a better experience in terms of getting around, using it while you're running. And I think that's a huge thing for the Venu 2 that it has over the Venu. Now, whether Garmin is going to roll those changes out to the original Venu, I don't know. If they do, great, and I think that would make the Venu still worth looking at. But I think the Venu 2, I think, does better in terms of how you interact with the watch, how you use that software, where things live, and that for me is going to be a big deal, whether you go for the newer Venu or go for the original. So in terms of run tracking experience and the kind of performance, it's pretty similar, I would say, based on my experience. And I've done a bunch of different runs on these. I've done some longer runs. I've done some interval stuff. I've done some track sessions with them. Just kind of go out and do some kind of miles type runs as well. So what I found is the data largely kind of matched up for the kind of key stats. In terms of the features you've got to play with, you can send workouts to the watch. So if you want to set up interval sessions, you can kind of do that. You're very limited in terms of navigation support, so you've only really got back to start support there in terms of that, in terms of you get lost and you want to get back somewhere. You've got access to Garmin Coach. You can kind of fire workouts over from that and your latest sessions and follow those from the watch. So in terms of the features, generally very similar. One thing that is different that's worth highlighting is that Garmin's Venu 2 has their latest heart rate sensor technology. Now, in my experience, while it promises kind of a more accurate data, I found it quite similar to what I got on the original Venu. I think for kind of those steady runs, it was fine and it kind of held up well against a Garmin HRM Pro chest strap. When I kind of did that interval and track stuff, the quicker stuff, it struggled to keep up and the data was very much off. So while it has a newer sensor, ultimately for me, the performance, kind of that high intensity, wasn't quite there yet. But if you're kind of doing those kind of steadier paced runs, I think the sensor technology is fine. But outside of that, you're probably going to need to pair up a chest strap, and you can do that, which is a good thing. And I've managed to pair up a Polar H10, the Garmin HRM Pro, and the Polar Verity Sense armband as well, no problem. So from the kind of running experience and that running data, I think very similar. There was only a couple of runs, I think maybe the track session where the original Venu recorded a bit more in terms of the distance, but the track is not always the best place for assessing GPS accuracy. So yeah, pretty similar across the board. You're not getting major advantages with that new heart rate monitor in my experience. So on that front and in that department, they're pretty level pegged. So I will briefly kind of cover the kind of smartwatch elements on these watches, and generally they're pretty similar in terms of what you get here. You've got that notification support, you've got Garmin Pay, you've got a music player, and you've got kind of offline support for services like Spotify. On the Venu 2, you're getting more storage, so if that's something that you care about, you're getting more on the Venu 2. But ultimately, the experience is very similar. You've still got access to Garmin Connect IQ if you want to kind of download some additional kind of apps and fields and stuff like that. The smartwatch experience for me has been very similar. I can't really separate them that much. The bigger screen may be a little bit nicer to look at notifications, but ultimately, from a smartwatch point of view, you're getting very similar experience across these two watches. Okay, so let's talk about battery life, and essentially Garmin is saying you're going to get a lot more battery on the newer Venu. You're looking at double the battery life in terms of smartwatch mode, so kind of up to 10 to 11 days in that mode. GPS battery life is longer. GPS battery with music streaming is longer. There's a battery saver mode here as well, and there's a charging mode, which I'll get into a little bit later. Now, essentially, in my experience, I think maybe those numbers have been a little bit generous from Garmin. I still find that you probably get about 5 to 6 days on the Venu 2, and I think it was about 5 days on the original Venu, and that was without the always-on display. Now, with the always-on display on, I found you got about 4 days on the Venu 2 and probably 3 days on the original Venu. So definitely more, probably a day, but it's not a huge amount, and it's still short of a week if you have that screen on, always on. In terms of kind of like GPS battery life performance as well, I found the drop off quite similar actually. So an hour run, for instance, would see the battery drop by 8 or 9% on both these watches. So a bit dubious about whether those GPS battery numbers kind of add up. What is a nice feature that you get on the Venu 2 that you don't get on the Venu is the rapid charging support. So basically what that says is you can put this on the charger, and it's the same charger that you use on both of these watches. So the one on the Venu works on the Venu 2. So 10 minutes of charge will get you a day's worth of tracking, or an hour of GPS tracking as well. And it's a really useful feature to have. I wish it was a feature that they had on Apple Watches and on Samsung watches and some of the other kind of fuller smartwatches, but that is a really nice feature that kind of feels like a short-term solution for not getting you a week's worth of a battery. 10 minutes on the charger will get you, and even just a little bit longer will get you back up to 100% in no time. So I think kind of day-to-day battery life, I think they're very similar. I think you're getting a little bit more on the Venu 2, but not a huge amount. But you do have that quick charging, that kind of rapid charge support that does kind of come in handy if you get a little bit short and you've only got a bit of time to kind of charge before you get out of the house, or you've forgotten to charge it overnight. So on the battery front, you're getting a bit more on the Venu 2, but I don't think it's huge in terms of that day-to-day use. But you have got that rapid charging feature that will come in handy. Okay, so should you go for the Garmin Venu 2 or the original Garmin Venu, or if you own a Garmin Venu, do you really need to upgrade to the Venu 2? So I'll start with the first question. And I think it really boils down to whether you want that high resolution screen, whether you want that little bit extra battery life, which I think it is a little bit extra, and you've got that charging feature as well. I think the big deal here really is the user interface, which I think makes the Garmin Venu 2 a much nicer watch to live with in my experience. Ultimately, same design, same look, so that's not something that's really going to sway you. And I think of the Venu, I think it's got all the same things really in terms of that core running experience. I think the screen is good enough. I think the battery life, I think, is good enough as well, not too far off what you get on the Venu 2. So I think if I had to pick between two, I would probably go for the Venu 2. But actually, if I got the Venu, I could live with it. I could live with the kind of difference in terms of the interface, because I think the running experience and tracking experience is very similar. Okay, so if you own the original Garmin Venu and you're wondering what are the kind of key things to upgrade or may persuade you to upgrade to the Venu 2, I think in my experience, the first thing would be the screen. Obviously, you're getting a high resolution screen and a slightly bigger screen. If you're happy with what you get on the Venu, and I think it's pretty good on what you get on the Venu already, then that won't be an issue. But if you want the best, that's what you're going to get on the Venu 2. I also think the battery life is a big deal here. Slightly better battery life, I think, but it's really the charging support which I think is the key difference here for me, and maybe in that extra day in always on display mode as well. And then there's the interface. Now, whether Garmin roll that new interface out onto the original Venu, I don't know. If they do, then that would be a reason to kind of stay put on that one. But at the moment, I think it makes the Venu 2 a nicer watch to kind of live with and interact with, and that would be a reason for me to choose the Venu 2 over the original Venu. So there you have it. That is my running take on the Garmin Venu 2 and how it compares to the original Garmin Venu. Now, if you've got any questions about the testing, or there's other features that you want to get a sense of how they compare on the two watches, let me know in the comments. As always, like and subscribe, hit that little bell to find out about our latest videos, and yeah, see you for the next Run Testers video.